You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today. But before we do, gotta thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. So a huge shout out to Governor Anatoby for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. And finally, our third sponsor is 988. The Oklahoma 988 Mental Health Lifeline. 988 is a direct 3-digit lifeline that connects you with trained behavioral health professionals that can get all Oklahomans the help that they need. Learn more by visiting 988oklahoma.com. That's 988oklahoma.com. And now, let's get into today's episode. Please welcome to the podcast Dr. Karl Hansen, who is the 2022 recipient of the OKCPS Wall of Fame. Which is right. Did I say that right? I think I said that right. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Excited to share your story. Before we do get into this, to the side of your profession and the amazing things that you've been doing, along with all the research that you do down at OU and the job that you have, give us a little bit of a backstory. The way we generally do this podcast, we set some context. So tell us a little bit about kind of where you grew up, going into school. I mean, we've got plenty of time, so you can go into as much detail as possible, and then we'll slowly get to how you get into the profession you have.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to go into those details, and then if I begin to bore you, you can just let me know, and I'll
Editing's
move on
great.
to something else. But
yeah.
I am a Oklahoma City native. I attended public schools here in Oklahoma City. I was very fortunate to have a number of wonderful role models. Both as teachers and then as my parents as well. My mother was a public school teacher in the Putnam City School District, so not in Oklahoma City public schools, but in the PC district. And she never knew anything but hard work. My earliest memories of her were getting up in the morning. She would get us fed, get us to school. She would go to school herself. She would come home. She would make our meals. She would clean the dishes. She would grade papers. She would do the laundry. And then I would fall asleep every night listening to the sewing machine as she made our clothes. Wow. And so, that was her life, and that's where I, at the earliest stages, began to understand, what goes into the kind of work that she does and did for many years, over 30 years. I finished high school here at Northwest Classen, and then I attended college locally as well at Oklahoma State University, and then was fortunate enough to be accepted into a dual degree program at OU in Oklahoma City, where I pursued both a medical degree and a PhD at the same time over that interval.
Wow. And
then completed later a residency in Obstetrics and Gynecology, and then did subspecialty training in Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility, where I became an infertility specialist, and that was at the University of Washington in Seattle. And then when I was done there, looked at a number of different opportunities, but was really excited to have the opportunity to come back to OU, partially, of course, because I had family here at the time, which was a big draw, but also because I recognized there was an opportunity to build an REI program at OU. Those services existed at OU, but they were fairly small. I felt that there was a need in the community and was really attracted to have the opportunity to build something that would include a research program, teaching programs, and clinical care.
That's pretty epic, and there was a lot that we can dive into there. So growing up then, obviously, you're around mum is just extremely hardworking, right? That's all you see is her hardworking, and it's like servant stuff, right? It's not like she's not working for herself. She's working hard for others, which is pretty special to have that experience, to see that in your own house. Like, mum is taking care of us, but she's also grading papers and she's teaching. And there's something there about being around a teacher as well, like the passion that they have to just educate and give their time and their skills to educating others. There's something really cool in that.
Yeah, and a lot to dive into in those statements. I think, the first is the work ethic that you learn from being around someone that puts in that much time. And my mom being a math teacher, she always wanted me to take a number of math classes, which were frequently hard. And this is a community where everyone knows each other, so it's not like things escape my mother's knowledge if I'm not performing well in school or putting out my full effort. And so I always did a lot of homework, and at the time, it made me very angry that I had so much homework. But the thing to keep in mind about education in general, of course, is that when you get done with school, there's so many things that you learn that you'll never do again, right? I mean, no one ever asks me questions about math anymore, or a lot of the science I've learned over the years. What you're really learning is learning how to learn. You're learning how to become a self-directed learner by practicing doing it over and over again. Because everyone, when they get out, whether they go into medicine, they go into another field, whatever you're doing, you have to learn skills to perform that job. And are you able to do that? And it's that practice that helps you figure out how to do those things. I think the other thing you mentioned that's really incredibly important too is this devotion of time and effort that goes into being an effective teacher. And in spite of the fact that I've talked with you about all the things my mom did, I was always impressed by the amount of time that she invested in others outside of work. So I grew up with people coming over to the house to be tutored. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago what had helped me be successful, I would have told you that I worked really, really hard. And that's accurate. I worked hard then and I work hard now. But I've come to understand that a big part of my success is really simply the product of the investment that others have made in me. That's huge. And then it's helped me understand as an educator myself that those investments that I make are what helps individuals develop in their careers.
Yeah, it's incredible what teachers do, right? Regardless of what you teach, just that like I said, the tutoring side as well, and just having that time to invest in people, especially in Oklahoma, because, if you don't live under a rock, you'll know, teachers don't get rewarded, I think, as much as they should, and that's a whole political thing, and I don't really want to dive into it, but you'll know that. Sure. The other thing is when you're growing up around that, it's very common for teachers' kids to become teachers too, right? Mm-hmm. So when did you have was there a moment where you're old enough to think, you know what, I'm going to go to college, I want to do this? When did you think that, education is for me, but it might not be in the traditional school education sense, it might be in the medical field sense?
Yeah, there were a number of different formative events. So I think I first became interested in medicine when, as a teenager, I was undergoing a physical for football and someone heard a heart murmur, the person who was doing an exam. And so I underwent a number of medical procedures, including a heart catheterization, where I was diagnosed with a problem called patent ductus arteriosus, which is where some large vessels that go to the heart are connected together.
Okay.
They're normally connected together before you're born because of the differences in the way the blood flows in utero compared to the way the blood flows after you're born, but mine had never closed.
Yeah.
And so through that diagnosis, I ended up having a heart surgery. Now they do those things with just little catheters, but at the time, I'm in the hospital for a few days with with a big incision that goes from about the middle of my chest all the way to the middle of my back, which is a big deal for a 17-year-old to have something like that done. And that made me really very interested in medicine. And then at about the same time, I started learning more about this new technology, in vitro fertilization, and I was very interested in genetics. And I thought, what an opportunity through genetics to improve the human condition. And I was fascinated by that technology. So I decided I wanted to go to medical school. And I was also very interested in research, and that's ultimately how I got involved in doing research when I was in college, and then later decided to pursue a PhD at the same time through a dual degree program. And throughout that whole time, a big part of what you're doing is teaching others. That's as you mature in any kind of learning, that's where you transfer from becoming the learner to becoming the mentor. That should be really the natural evolution of the process we all go through, where you're teaching someone else to do those things. And when I talk with medical students about those things, I try to impart on them how important that is. You're going to be the one who's in the position to give back. Are you able and willing to do that? Will you invest in the development of others?
Yeah, and just that specialty and that the response that you were getting, or the way that you felt, I'm sure, after having that heart surgery and that surgery, and you're looking at the person who's just done this to you, right? And you're so thankful for everything that they've done. But then for you to now be on the other side, right, and be able to, through the IVF and the research that you've done, you're able to give people, because that's a big deal, right? People can't have a family, and they come to you and they do this. To have a part in that, they're lifelong, they're going to be grateful for you forever, right? It's a really, really cool thing to be involved with, and I'm sure you get cases every day and people every day that just thank you and they did this. But for me, it sounds like there's a lot more to it than just that, right? It seems like you don't just go out and do a bunch of research because you just like to do research, right? You clearly have a sense of meaning and a sense that you want to leave a legacy during your time.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think the way I describe it a lot of times to medical students is that we should be about much more than just learning the standard of care. The standard of care exists today, and you must learn it, you must understand it. But if that is all we do in our careers, then we are not advancing health.
Right.
We're not improving outcomes. And so how do we improve? Only through research and clinical trials is the only way we get better. And I would love it if I had a clinical trial available for every person that walked in my office. A thoughtful trial that says we don't know which of these treatments are better, but you can help us answer that question by participating in a trial.
Yeah.
And you have to have a passion for it. Your whole team has to have a passion for it, because research is not something that I do by myself. All my partners fully buy into that as well, and I have great research staff that work with me to help try to move that mission forward. But yeah, you're right. It's a lot more than just the personal satisfaction of either doing a project or writing a paper. It's doing it with the end goal in mind.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt, too, that there's a great deal of satisfaction in what I do. And probably I get more direct feedback in terms of how I'm doing than so many other areas of medicine. Every day I am reminded how we're performing. We have patients that are pregnant, patients that are not, and you celebrate those victories and you suffer with the families when you can't get things to work. But definitely feedback on a very regular basis as to how you're performing and how your clinic is performing.
Yeah. Tell me about kind of the dual degree that's just, I don't know anybody else who decided to do something like that to the scale that you've done it at. So tell me about kind of how that worked out and everything that you went through.
Yeah, sure. Well, there are a number of medical students every year who choose to pursue a dual degree like that. I would say typically in the College of Medicine, out of a class of 150, 160 medical students, there's a few that pursue a dual degree. That may be 3 to 6, depending on exactly the year and how many people show an interest in an aptitude in that pathway. It's absolutely not for everyone. Usually the way that program is run is you do the first 2 years of med school with a given class, and then you go into a lab and do several years of research and then finish your degree, your PhD, and then you go back to medical school and finish the 3rd and 4th years. And so there's no doubt it's a real commitment. You leave your class behind, and that's hard to do because you feel like everyone's passing you by, but you recognize you're doing something different. And then the feedback that you get in the lab is so different than in clinical practice. In clinical practice, as I mentioned to you, in my own clinic now, I've won some and lost some every day.
Yeah.
But I've got answers. When I'm in the lab, and I trained in a basic science lab, this is back in the 1990s, but I spent most of a year trying to clone a gene, which is something that is probably hard to describe briefly, but today the whole human genome has been sequenced, and if I want to get a fragment of DNA sequenced, I can spend $5 and get someone to do a gazillion base pairs. But back when I did it, I was doing this all myself, and I could spend a couple of days sequencing 300 or 400 base pairs. It's just really small amounts, and to keep doing that day after day, week after week, when an experiment isn't working, it's a whole different ball game in terms of delayed gratification to do that. And so you have to have a mindset that you enjoy it, and I love working in the basic science lab too.
Yeah.
And that's not what I do now. Now what I do is all clinical research, but I trained in a basic science lab.
Yeah, technology is amazing, right?
Yeah,
all the stuff that's happened now, right? Like you said, it's so much, I guess, more advanced now, right? You're getting so many more answers in a short period of time because of technology's evolved.
Sure. All the things I learned are almost obsolete, the vast majority of them are, because we have technologies that are so superior, and the throughput of some of these technologies today are things we couldn't have even dreamed of back then.
Yeah. So when you go through that and you finally, you finish your schooling and you're on to do you think I'm going to do my own practice, or do you go work for a hospital? How does that work to the next phase?
Sure. So when you finish your training, regardless of what that is, for me it was finishing an REI fellowship. The options would be either you choose to go into maybe a private practice setting, maybe you're your own boss, or maybe where you set up your own business, or maybe you work with a big group practice, and maybe that's a group practice that is employed by where you're employed by a healthcare system, or it may be that you want to stay in an academic environment, which could be a place like OU or a place like where I was at the University of Washington. Obviously, there are academic medical centers all over the country, and that's a big career decision to decide what you want to do. For me, it was never really a question. I knew I wanted to stay in an academic medical center, but certainly many people leaving training choose to go into clinical practice only, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need full-time clinicians
to pay off their bills as well, because is there more money down that route at that thing? Because a lot of people look at doctors and they're like, you guys drive fancy cars and play golf all the time at country clubs, but you've worked for
I'm sure there's
16 years to get to where you're at, basically.
There are some that do that, and I would say generally speaking, if you're in a pure clinical practice and a private practice, then you are going to make more than if you're in an academic practice. But that's the trade-off, going into it. Some of the dollars I earn in clinical practice are used to help subsidize my academic time, and I get that. Yeah,
that makes sense. Because and for people listening, REI stands for Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility. Did I say that right?
Endocrinology and Infertility. Yeah, you were really close.
Yes, close enough. I think we were talking briefly before we came in here, and we have someone in this building who's had a personal experience with you, and I think it was one of your patients, which is incredible. You probably didn't think that when you were coming in today to have that experience, but that's just one of the great things about what you do. But going into that side, then diving into all of the research and just the things that you've been able to find out and the breakthroughs that you've had, tell us a little bit about those things and stuff that you're most proud of that people generally don't hear when they just read your bio, or if they're going to the event that's coming up, the event that you're being inducted into, this Wall of Fame, like they might not understand how deep and how good and how amazing the things that you've done are in a 30-second bio.
Right.
So you don't strike me as someone who really wants to talk about themselves a lot and be like, look at me, I've done all this thing, but I'm giving you that opportunity, and it's okay to tell me how amazing you are. So please go ahead.
Well, you're correct. I am not one that prefers to talk about myself a lot. I think it distracts from the bigger issues. But I'm happy to talk with you about some of the trials that I've been involved in that don't just involve me, of course, but a number of centers around the country. Our group here at OU has been part of a cooperative group funded by the National Institutes of Health called the Reproductive Medicine Network. And we've done a number of different trials. Some of the ones that I think really have been the most impactful, I'll talk to you about one of them, and there's another one that's ongoing now that I think is really important too. But one of the things that we know is that women with obesity which is a common problem in our society today, have more difficulty getting pregnant. They have more pregnancy complications. And the thought process has always been, when you're seeing a patient who is struggling with obesity, you need to go lose weight. And if you lose weight, it will fix all these problems. But understand that knowing that a person with obesity has these problems and a person without it does not is not the same thing as saying that if you lose this weight, that your outcomes will be better.
Yeah.
And so this is a huge debate in our field because of the increasing problem with obesity. And so while there have been a number of trials looking at this, one of the large ones that we did, led by Rick LeGros at Penn State, was looking at whether or not a weight loss intervention would actually improve outcomes from standard treatment. And the primary outcome we were looking at is whether the woman gets pregnant or not, which is what is the main outcome that matters to most people. But one of the other things we've also tracked is how healthy are those pregnancies, and what about outcomes for newborns. And so what happened was that we had over 200 couples that were randomly assigned to having a weight loss intervention with an exercise program versus just doing exercise alone. And that exercise was not so rigorous that people really changed their weight very much. And they did that for 4 months. And then after that 4 months, they went into a standard treatment that we would usually use for couples with otherwise unexplained infertility.
Yeah.
And what we found at the end of that trial was actually that weight loss intervention did not improve outcomes in terms of did you get pregnant or not. And I think that's incredibly important, because while weight loss may have a number of other health benefits, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that weight loss takes a lot of time, and many people are not going to be successful with it.
Yeah.
And so are we going to withhold treatment, waiting for someone to do that without solid evidence that it improves outcomes?
Right.
I think that position becomes very difficult to justify. And so when there are programs around the country that say you need to get your BMI less than X or we're not going to treat you, that's a really tough position to defend with that trial that came out, as well as a number of other ones. However, when we looked at some of the pregnancy outcomes, it does appear that there may be a slight increased risk of some complications, and our study really isn't powered to look at all those outcomes. But I think, at the end of the day, we can say, while weight loss may improve some pregnancy outcomes and most certainly has some long-term health benefits, withholding treatment for weight loss doesn't make any sense. And the time that you spend doing it may actually make things worse, because one of the biggest challenges that we face in infertility medicine is simply the impact of age on outcomes.
Okay.
While both true for male and females, is more true for the women.
Yeah. Is age the biggest factor then?
I would say age is one of the biggest factors that we face. Naturally, fertility declines with increasing age. That's and again, if I'm getting off on the weeds here, you can let me know.
Oh, you're good, yeah.
But unlike men who are making sperm throughout their adult lives, women are born with all the eggs they're going to have.
Okay.
And they lose them throughout their adult life, and when they're all gone, a woman goes through menopause. That usually happens in the early 50s. But there's a huge variation between women. Some women go through menopause before they're 40. Some don't until they're in their late 50s.
Gotcha.
So that's like a 20-year interval when natural fertility goes away. And the average age of a natural pregnancy is generally in the early 40s to mid-40s at the latest. Right. And so if someone comes in and they're in their mid-40s, that's something that's going to be very difficult for me to help outside of utilizing donor eggs.
Sure.
And so, when someone comes to me in their late 30s, for example, and they are struggling with obesity, they're probably a lot better off pursuing treatment earlier rather than waiting for weight loss.
Waiting to get in shape, because it's, like you said, and then also not just getting in shape, but then keeping that weight off too, right, for the pregnancy. And there's...
Yeah, and that's related to it too. Certainly there are differences in weight gain during pregnancy.
Yeah. Is there anything else that's a factor that people might not be aware of? Obviously, age is probably the one that most people are aware of, but is there anything else that, other than age and obesity, that just the kind of the main factors that stand out?
Well, again, hoping not to get off into the weeds too much, that would be one of the bigger overriding issues that we see. And those two are really pretty big ones, because certainly obesity is a real challenge in our society today for a variety of reasons. But certainly a variety of societal factors have influenced when people want to have children today. Right. Advancing careers, later marriage or later decisions to have children all factor into that.
Yeah, and like to that point, right? It's not, gone are the days where mum just stayed at home, dad went to work, right? And
Sure.
like it's a lot different now. And like you said, there are plenty of females out there who are advancing their careers and rightly so, and they the culture is no longer you should stay at home and clean the dishes and make dinner for dad to come home. It's building a business for yourself, right, and building a name for yourself, and we need that,
Right. Absolutely.
but like I said, there's stress in that too, right? When you're at home, I'm not to say that there isn't stress if you're just a stay-at-home mum, but if you're working all the time, and I know many friends of mine who are now in their 30s that they're like, we're still working on their careers, and they want to do that, and they will have kids at some point, but it's not the focus, which is great. I don't have kids. We don't plan to yet. My culture is to have kids kind of later as well, whereas in Oklahoma, where it seems to be like in your 20s for the most part, for the most part, at least what I've seen, you're having kids. But I'm sure, with your line of work now, it's probably, would you say it's more common to have people coming to you in their 30s and late 30s and early 40s that are having those issues and trying to have kids? Because of the cultural change in the
I would say yes. The patients that I see are frequently in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. I do see some patients in their 20s. That's less common, and that's of course because infertility is less common in those. It's going to be less common in those age groups, and that it just depends on where you practice. When I was practicing and doing training in Seattle, every patient I saw was in her upper 30s. And then in Oklahoma, I certainly see some younger people, partially because they're pursuing pregnancy at a younger age here than they were there at the time. And some other problems are more common here too, like obesity, which in some cases interferes with normal ovulation, and so I see these women at an earlier age for that reason.
Is there anything that people generally can do practically that help, or is it basically down to genetics, other than what you've mentioned with obesity being a huge factor? Is there any other things before? And I'm sure there's phases, but just for the general people listening who might not be aware.
Sure. I would say the first is don't wait too long to seek an evaluation or treatment. Our general recommendation would be if you're under 35 and you've been trying for a year or more, then you should undergo at least an evaluation, if not treatment. If you're over 35, then probably after 6 months of efforts without a pregnancy, then you ought to have an evaluation done.
Yeah.
And that it's frustrating when I see someone that has struggled with infertility for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and now they come in at a time when treatment is going to have a lower success rate.
They haven't done anything about it. They haven't been proactive to say, I should probably get this figured out.
Sure. In fairness, too, I should say that that's also influenced by insurance coverage in the U.S. and in Oklahoma. So some states and some companies cover infertility care, and it's mandated in some states. And so we have some individuals in Oklahoma that work for a big company like Amazon, that has infertility benefits, or maybe they work for one of the bigger companies like Chesapeake used to have those benefits, Devon, places like that, and they would have an infertility benefit, but many policies in Oklahoma don't. And so I'm not going to blame the person who doesn't come in because they can't afford it.
That makes sense. I didn't think of it. Again, me being from the UK and having healthcare, we don't worry about that stuff, right?
Your system is entirely different.
Being on your side, I would just be so frustrated of that stuff, right? Like, it's not their fault, because medical procedures, if you don't have insurance, generally cost a lot of money, regardless of what it is, and that's the tough part, right? It's like, you can't blame them for not coming in to that point, right? If they don't have, the means to have that done.
Right. And, that's not just true with infertility. There are other areas of care. Certainly mental health care is another area that's been extremely undervalued in our society. But, these are different decisions that we make as a society. In Europe, healthcare is much more expansive. There are things that you as a society have chosen to invest in, whether that's better highways or college degrees, and those are decisions that have collectively been made in the U.S., we're not going to fund those things.
Yeah.
Or really, we're going to spend the money for them, but we're actually not going to pay for them.
Right. Yeah.
That's our big issue as well. But those are choices that we make as a society.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating that so many people that need care can't get it because of insurance, and then there's also just an access issue in general. In a relatively rural state like Oklahoma, there just aren't enough physicians here. Is part of that issue, and that's not just true in infertility care. That's true in just things like obstetrics. I'm the chair of the OBGYN department, and so part of what I do is address issues with our OBGYN groups, our maternal fetal medicine groups, and there's shortages of those folks all over the state, and whole counties where there's no OB care.
To that point, do you know Katie Smith?
Oh yes,
We're really good. Well, I say that I'm really good friends with her husband, Jason.
Oh, very good.
That's it's such a small world. Jason was my assistant golf coach at SNU. Unofficial assistant golf coach. He volunteered.
Fantastic.
We
very small world.
Oh, such a small world. But I get to hear about everything from her, right, and all the the things that's happening and how busy she is. And me and Jason basically try and keep away from her how much golf he plays. During COVID, he played a lot of golf because he couldn't go, because he's a pastor, right? He couldn't go on, and his job as a pastor is to go on visits to meet people, and he couldn't do that because of COVID. So he played golf a lot, and his golf game really improved. It's back to the normal now. He's struggling at the moment, but that's funny. There's such a small world that.
Katie Smith is fantastic. She's our section chief in general obstetrics and gynecology.
Yeah.
And so she does a lot of the same things that I do. She probably didn't spend quite as much time in school. She decided that she was done with school sooner.
Yeah, definitely. She is
great.
the reason, actually, she's the reason that my wife loves being on the Peloton, because she wanted a new one, so we bought their old one.
Ah, really?
So
okay.
I have her to thank for my wife being on the Peloton at 5 o'clock every morning and waking me up. Anyway, tell me about, nice. They are nice. They're the most just convenient things ever, and I tell everybody it's totally worth getting one. I'm totally part of the cult. Come bringing things forward, tell me a little bit about kind of like what you're focusing on at the moment, projects you're working on, research you're working on at the moment that you're kind of deep into and excited about, and maybe some breakthroughs you're having.
Sure. So one of the projects that we're working on now together with Dr. Val Baker at Johns Hopkins, and then also Ruth Lottie at Stanford University, is a project looking at outcomes of pregnancies from what are called frozen embryo transfer cycles. And again, if I get up on the weeds too much and this seems too complicated, let me know. But we have been, as a profession, very successful at being able to freeze embryos and then thaw them at a later time and transfer them into a woman's uterus in order to achieve a pregnancy.
Yeah.
Which is a great breakthrough because it allows us to store embryos for long periods of time. The way that those cycles are done when you're actually going through the process of helping a woman get pregnant is you can do it one of two different ways. One is where you monitor a woman in her natural cycle. In other words, you just wait for her to ovulate, and when she ovulates, you do the embryo transfer. The other is to do it in what's called a hormone replacement therapy way. And the way that's done is I artificially create a menstrual cycle by giving this woman estrogen followed by progesterone, and then I do the transfer.
Yeah.
Again, I told you I'd be off in the weeds.
The good thing is it's just a cocktail of stuff, right? But it's amazing because it works. And obviously the skill is in everything you've learned to do it. I'm glad we have people like you in this world.
So the hormone replacement therapy way is the way it's usually done. And why is it done that way? Because it's convenient. It's easier for me to schedule it if I just give you medications rather than following you in a natural cycle until you ovulate.
Yeah.
So that's what most of us do around the country. But Dr. Baker's group did some studies and recognized that women that had that hormone replacement therapy may have an increased risk of a problem called preeclampsia in pregnancy. And there's certainly the hint that is there, but the only way you can really figure that out is by doing a large clinical trial where you randomly assign women to have those two different protocols. And then at the end of the day, see, is the risk for that problem called preeclampsia, which involves high blood pressure and involves risk for the mother and the baby, is that really higher when you use hormone replacement therapy? And it would be an incredibly impactful study because there are tens and tens of thousands of frozen embryo transfer cycles that happen in the U.S. every year, and there are that many more in Europe and around the world. So if one of those protocols is really associated with a lower risk of preeclampsia, then that's the one that we ought to be doing. And so this trial, while relatively straightforward, most definitely, as we talked about earlier, has the ability to impact our care and advance the standard of care. So it's a really exciting trial. Collectively, we've enrolled about 300 couples out of about 800 and something that we're going to enroll. But I'm excited about that one because it will change the practice of in our field.
Yeah, that is the stuff, right? It's like, how can I, if I'm a part of a change, right, for the better, and I'm a part of it, and we have a team that's put together, and it might not just be like you, it might be other people that are in your profession around the country, around the world, but if you're collectively working and researching the right stuff together, somebody has a breakthrough, it benefits everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like that's the beauty of it, right? It's not just like, I'm not just working on this for me or my immediate family, I'm working on this for the entire population.
Sure.
That's incredible stuff.
It is, and frankly, if you're not being responsive to looking at population outcomes, then these studies wouldn't be funded anyway.
Right.
The amount of funding for women's health research is unfortunately incredibly low. And in fertility medicine, it's even less.
Yeah.
So there's a really small pot of money that all of us in our field are competing for to try to do these big clinical trials, because you can't do a little local trial and answer a question.
Yeah.
So you've got to be responsive to really a broad public health need and a broad impact on the field.
Yeah. With coming back to, obviously, the Wall of Fame, and you're being inducted into that. And coming from a public school, obviously there's a lot of hope there for kids who are in public schools and our education system. Like kind of, I guess, what your kind of mother did for kids and you as well, and kind of portrayed hard work. How do you then give that message to the kids of the next generation of potential doctors, people who are going to replace you? How do you go about, I guess, giving them hope and showing them that they can do this? Obviously, they'll see your name and see your bio and be like, oh, this guy did this thing. How do you put that into context for them to make it practical?
Sure. Well, one person can't do that alone.
Sure.
I think part of it is energizing our teachers through processes like this. I think our teachers in the Oklahoma City Public School and across the state are all incredibly hardworking individuals, and if I can be an inspiration to them or to any students, then that's fantastic. I think part of it is being a role model too. It's what you say doesn't matter as much to me as what you do. It is really what you do that defines who you are.
Yeah.
And being a role model through showing that I've done those things by walking that walk, and then you are able to reach some level of success, however you define that. Recognizing that hard work is a part of success for just about everyone, regardless of what area you're in.
Yeah.
And then, to the students who, again, impacting them on a broad level is hard from this single award, but don't be afraid to take hard classes. You really have to push yourself. If you're And I know that is more challenging today, and then we're just coming off the COVID episode,
Sure.
But I got to be a much better student by practicing doing homework.
Doing the stuff that you generally don't want to do, right?
Doing the stuff you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And then, just the things you glean from that, and from going through that process over and over again. Like if it's a math problem, when I see a problem that looks like this, what steps do I take next?
Yeah.
When I read a story problem, how do I set it up? When I read something, how do I figure out what is important in it? That's a skill that just gets better with practice. But because like when you're in med school or even in college, the reading assignments you get can be crazy. Just all the things you have to read. You can never remember all of it. How do you figure out what's important in that?
Right. Breaking that down.
That's the part that gets better through practice.
What the other thing, obviously, like you have an extremely probably high stress stuff, what you do. You're very involved, you're very busy. It's a lot of, I don't know the right word for it, but it's very hard to do, and you're extremely intelligent. What are the stuff you do to just get away? Like, what is your,
Email is my favorite.
I'm sure you got a lot of those too, but like, what do you do to just kind of, when you come home from a day of just researching all day and being busy for 12 hours, like, how do you get away? How do you separate that so you don't burn out and you don't, fall victim to being addicted to everything that you do?
That can be really hard to do, and I admit I'm probably not the best person to ask how they've got that work-life balance thing figured out.
Work-life balance doesn't exist.
I don't think that I really will ever be very good at that. And in fact, sometimes on weekends when I don't really know what I would do with myself if I didn't have work to do all the time. But I try to make time to exercise, and I think that's, you were mentioning the Peloton earlier. I've had a tread for a long time, and then they recalled it, and then I also had to move at the same time, and so I didn't know what I was going to move, this 500-pound treadmill.
Right.
And I thought I'll just let them take it back.
Yeah.
And then actually at OU, there's a couple of nice gyms. There's one right next to my clinic, and I just use that Peloton app, and I go get on the treadmill over there. So I do that, and then I've got 3 dogs, and I like spending time with them. They're not terribly active dogs, and so they're good for my lifestyle, because when I get home, I'm not ready to go on a long walk with them. But 1 English bulldog and 2 French bulldogs, and so they excel at sleeping.
Yes, which is good, right? It's
so it's like I get home, they're friendly. I don't need to do a long walk. And then my kids are grown now, so they're not. One of them is in the house still, but one of them is living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And always enjoy having the opportunity to get together with him. Yeah.
Do they follow in your footsteps into the medical world?
No. They.
You happy about that?
Well, I would have been very proud if they decided to pursue that, but I also recognize my wife's an OBGYN physician too. And
wow, okay.
They've kind of grown up seeing how hard that is, and I think they decided that they really
don't want any part of that.
That's okay. I was talking about my mom earlier, and my mom had this special power where she could just look at you and just crush you. Just you had not put out a good performance, and that was all I needed. That was enough to shake you to the core, and you would work harder. I did not inherit that power, and my kids are just like, if I'm not happy with their performance, it's like,
let's go get ice cream. It'll be okay.
That's okay. It's glad to know you feel that way, but it doesn't really shake my psyche or anything.
That's awesome.
So I didn't inherit that. So no, they did not pursue that. One of them is working as an accountant in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, and then the other one's still in school right now, but not going into medicine.
Finishing up then, I guess outside of because it is fun to talk about being a human being and having a life and outside of work. Do you have anything coming up that's a vacation that you're happy about, or something that you're excited for that's not work related?
We are hoping to go to Europe again next year. Okay. I've been a few times, and I love London, and I don't even know if that's going to be on the itinerary yet, but I just loved going to Europe, Amsterdam. Having been from those areas, I know you know what I mean. They're just fantastic places.
Architecture's great. History it's incredible. If you have any time, and you kind of dive into Switzerland, Austria, the Alps. Anywhere you go, and the good thing is you can get pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
Like public transport's great. Ride the train, airplanes. Like if people haven't been, it's worth doing. And I stress you have to go for more than 10 days.
Yeah.
Right, because you just get overwhelmed if you go in such a short period of time, and you'll be frustrated because you're so close to going to Rome or Barcelona or somewhere, but you just need an extra day and you don't have it.
Yeah,
that's the tough part.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to go to the expense of traveling overseas, you really need to
make it worth
figure out a way to stay long enough to make it worthwhile.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking an hour out of your day. Obviously, you're extremely busy, and come share some stories with us down here. Final congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's one of many awards that you've won and will continue to receive as you go on through your practice, through your research. But I really appreciate you coming in, and it's great to be a role model like your mother was to you, and you are to kids who you might never meet, but people will see you in this wall of fame. They'll look at you, they'll look at your bio, look at the things that you've done long after we're on this planet, and known that I can make a difference, and I don't have to go to a private school, and I don't have to have a ton of money behind me. Through hard work, you will get, you'll make a difference. So
absolutely,
it's amazing that to see that and know you now and see what you stand for. And I really appreciate you coming in. For people listening, how do they reach out? How do they, you joked about email. Is there a way that someone could, if someone's listening that just thinks, I would love to meet this person, I'd love to talk to them about my career, where I should go, how do they reach out?
Sure. So you can call my office, or I can give you an email address as well.
Yeah, I can put that in the description. Yeah.
But our office, our academic phone number there is 405-271-8787. And then email is karl-hansen@ouhsc.edu.
Awesome.
And then if I don't get back to your email quickly, just remember that you're in with a bunch of other ones.
Yeah, then you get
I'll get to as quick as I can.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much. For people listening, I'll post all the links in the description below, and we'll catch you next episode. Cheers. Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And finally, our third sponsor for today, the Oklahoma 988 Mental Health Lifeline. 988 is the direct 3-digit lifeline that connects you with the trained behavioral health professionals that can get all Oklahomans the help that they need. Learn more by visiting 988oklahoma.com. It's 988oklahoma.com. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.